live. Another episode of The Lowdown. What a good name. Was that your idea or mine?
I think that was your idea.
Today we have Adam Robles here, and Adam does work with the Raptors Republic, which is what we're going to talk about today. Obviously, with the season being back on and them being defending champions, and sort of where you see this all headed, what you think about what's happened with COVID, how they're playing. I mean, their first two games, they've been awesome. But I guess before we get into that, just to sort of, for any viewers or listeners to be transparent, that I know you because you're actually the guy that takes care of all my social media stuff. You're the brains behind the Pinpoint Health and the Dr. Lou brand, and everything we do in terms of social, this podcast. If you like how it looks, reach out to Adam. If you don't like how it looks, reach out to Adam. But you've sort of helped me with all of this stuff, helped me to navigate all this. I suck. I've said this like many times. I don't know if I've ever said it on the podcast, but I've definitely said it on the radio that I suck at social media, and you know that about me now. But you and I have been working together for a year, I think, a little more than a year on all this stuff, and it's been incredible to see the progression of it and sort of how far you've taken me with that, because people think it's me, but no, it's not. I suck. I'm no good at it.
No, I like I said, first of all, I want to thank you so much for having me on the podcast.
I didn't have a choice. You told me I had to have you.
Just wanted to add to that, you definitely do not suck at social media.
Come on, buddy.
The content.
You kidding me?
No, like the content that you create is great. I just help you just repurpose it the way that it should be and make it digestible.
You know what though? But that's a big thing that people don't realize. Like, ever since starting the podcast, I've had people that have reached out to me, and like, everyone thinks it's just a Zoom call, right? Which is what we're on right now. We're just talking, but now all you and I see is, two screens and black around it. But then you repurpose it with, all of the branding behind it and all of the things that you do, which takes a lot of time to do it the right way and make it look the right way. And then even the snippets that you create for social so that we share it. So, I mean, it's definitely a team effort. So I'll give you 50% of the credit. How's that?
You definitely deserve way more credit than myself. So, I mean, just to add to the background, for those that are listening, we started working together about a year ago. And essentially we've been teaming up on your branding specific to your personal brand, as well as Pinpoint. And it's been quite a fantastic journey.
Yeah, it's been, and we'll, I'm sure in the future at some point we'll do another podcast that's tailored towards like social and branding and all of the things that you're definitely an expert on. But another hat that you wear is the hat that you wear with Raptors Republic, which is obviously with the season being back on and the Raptors being the hottest thing in Canada, since it's the only championship that we've had in decades, is through our amazing basketball team. It's sort of top of mind, I think, for a lot of people. I know you were busy over the weekend watching those games. I was busy watching them, but tell us a little bit about sort of like, number one, what Raptors Republic is, how it got started, your role in it, and just sort of walk us through that. Because one of the other things that is sort of like people don't know, and everybody knows Wine and Dine. What people don't realize is you're the guy that did that, or you and the people from Raptors Republic. But that was sort of your baby, and everyone talks about that. Everyone uses it as a catchphrase, and nobody knows where it came from.
I guess that's the beauty with the campaign, right? It just took on a vehicle of its own. But to take a step back, so Raptors Republic is the largest independent fan blog for the Raptors. We've been around for about 10 years. And we essentially, I want to say that we gained our notoriety because we provided content around the Raptors, consistent content, at a time when like the TSNs and the Sportsnet weren't really covering the Raptors as much. Like around the time that they started, it was pretty much hockey, and then basketball towards the end, just before they wrapped up the show. So that's where the Raptors really gained their fan base for hardcore Raptors and basketball fans in Canada.
Have you been part of it since the beginning?
No, so I actually joined prior to last season, just before Kawhi joined, which was, of course, our magical year that they won the championship. So it was pretty unique to, like, the Raptors Republic was was a pretty well-known entity, but on the social media side, when it came to digital and all that, they didn't really have a strategy specific to Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. So I more or less built that from scratch, and help them utilize those platforms to build out their brand further and tap into a new audience. As you mentioned with Quan and Dine, we essentially spearheaded that with an agency partner called Rethink. And we started that just before the Eastern Conference Finals against Milwaukee. I remember we launched it on a Wednesday, and then the Friday I was appearing on news channels talking about the campaign, and then 2 weeks after that, close to 1,000 restaurants joined. So it was quite a crazy experience, something I'll never forget. And even though he didn't re-sign with us, it was still pretty cool to be part of.
Yeah, I mean the exposure on that, it's like one of those things where people were saying it, and it's like part of your nomenclature, but you have no idea where did this even originate. Like, you know, and people sometimes think that these things just sort of happen out of like thin air, like it just happened, like some guy in a basement said it and then someone else repeated it, but it didn't. It was a purposeful intent that you guys had to try to build something around. And I guess, you know, with what you do with social that's sort of what you're always looking for, is how can you create something that just sort of catches fire and spreads. And like, I mean, by the middle of the summer, like restaurants had stickers on their doors that said "Wine and Dine," right? Like it was everywhere, and people use it as a catchphrase. And yeah, unfortunately, he didn't stick around, which sucks. What's your take on that? Like you're obviously a massive basketball fan. I know that about you, and I'm a basketball fan as well, but probably not to the extent that you are. So in terms of just the knowledge that you have around it, but like sort of, what's your thought on that? Like with what transpired last year in 2019, like bringing him here, everything that was done, like it's an unbelievable story when you stop and think about it.
Yeah, you know what? Like, I like looking back, and obviously with all the information that you have, I really think that he had his mind made up that he was probably just going to be here just for a year.
Yeah.
And he had his eyes set on LA, whether it be playing for the Lakers or for the Clippers. And yeah, he obviously is a professional, and he went through, like he never took days off, and he really gave it all for the team and for the city. So yeah, I don't have any regrets in that regard, but it's also just a crazy situation that he was just here for a year. They won the title, and then he left right away.
So that's my thing. Like, I think I totally agree with you. I think in his mind before he ever came here, it was sort of made up that like, hey, I'm going to go spend a year there. I'm also not going to shortchange them. I'm going to give them, because that's one thing that you got to give him credit for. Like he came out, Absolutely. He played every time he had to play. It didn't matter. But I guess the one intangible that he wouldn't have known in the beginning, and probably more likely would have thought, okay, we're not going to win. Like we'll probably get into the playoffs. We'll do something there. I'll have been in the playoffs again, and then I'm going to go back to LA. But they won a championship. Like they were the best team in the whole league. And sort of like to just not have a chance at that repeat with that same team is sort of unprecedented, right? Like that's like I don't think there's ever been a team that would have been dismantled like that, the year after with the star player deciding to leave.
Yeah, like I actually don't think in all professional sports that this has ever happened, where the star player has left immediately after winning a title.
Only in Toronto. Only.
Yeah, and I feel like that idea with a lot of Toronto fans, we need to also get rid of that idea. Where like Toronto teams are just cursed. We're not cursed. I mean, we've had teams for the most part because we've had bad management, right?
Right.
And that has obviously led to teams being unable to go win it all. But yeah, with Kawhi, like I'm starting to think about it through his perspective. Like he is American, playing in a foreign country. Even though it is Canada, it's much different. And he's super close to his family, from what I've heard.
Yeah.
If I were to take it like you got to view it from like another point of view that benefits us, right? Like think about like John Tavares, where he played for New York. He played for the Islanders, which is obviously a great city. But he decided to come home because he's from Oakville.
That's right.
And if I was a professional athlete and I was playing in the States, I would probably come home to play for Toronto, even if they weren't a great city, just because I want to be close, playing for my city that I grew up being a fan of, but also being close to my family and friends. So I actually, I support it because, like, there's nothing like playing in front of people that you grew up with, right? Like
Yeah,
I think that's like the
100%.
ultimate.
Yeah. Yeah, and I agree with that too. I guess my only thing that I'm thinking is like if you are and I are in those shoes where you're that elite athlete and you just won a
Mm-hmm.
championship, don't you want to give yourself the best shot at repeating that, right? And I mean,
Yeah.
look at the team that we had. Like obviously COVID happened, and now
Mm-hmm.
they're 2 games in, and they've won both games. Like they're still an incredible team. Like they are
Yep.
still a solid team. It's like that's the one thing that I think people don't realize. It's not like there was no team before and Kawhi came here and all of a sudden there was a team.
Yeah.
No, it was a well-oiled machine already, and it was
Hmm.
missing like the supercharge. And
Yeah.
it got it with Kawhi for sure. But they're also a great team outside
Yeah.
of Kawhi Leonard. They're still a team that's played together, that knows how to play together. The management,
Mm-hmm.
like you said, the management for the Raptors is they know how to win and they know what they
Incredible.
want to do to win. So those are all of the missing links. But that's I guess my thing. Like I don't know. I don't know. I see it 100%, but I just sit there
Yeah.
and think like, wouldn't you have wanted to say like, okay, one more year? Like, let me see
Yeah.
what I could do with one more year in this. I mean, in hindsight, it's good that like it was COVID, so it
Yeah.
sort of screwed everything up anyways, even though it's back on. But I don't, at the end of the day, I don't, what do you think about these games right now? Like the way they're playing it with no fans, like it's not horrible to watch on TV, but it's still a little strange.
Yeah, I mean, I think the NBA out of all the leagues are taking, they are the best league and taking the best approach to it.
So far, yeah. For sure.
Yeah, obviously it's very bizarre playing in front of, I guess, like digital fans.
Yeah.
But it's to ensure that they're protecting everybody that's inside the bubble, right? Like when you
Yeah.
think about the NBA bubble and the concept of it, it's actually pretty ridiculous that
Yeah.
300 players are going to be on the campus for 4 months just to finish a season.
Yeah.
So when you think of that idea, like the biggest thing that I think about is the mental for a lot of these players, right? Because they're obviously separated from their family and their friends, and that will be super difficult. Like in a lot of ways, like they're leaving, right? And
But in a lot of ways, that's like also like how you can get down to who to the nitty gritty of who wants it the most, right? Like
absolutely,
because a lot of sports, a lot of these elite athletes, what separates them is not just their physical abilities, but their mental ability, right? Like that ability to be headstrong and like sort of be away from what you're accustomed to and sort of be there. And also, I think like I agree with you for sure that the way the NBA is doing it, the way it looks, seems to be the best out of every sport. Like to watch hockey and see it in a big, massive arena is like it's horrible. But when you watch basketball and then like they've made it all smaller and it sort of fits together, it looks like it should be that way.
It's more intimate. Yep.
Yeah, it looks that way, and the virtual fans are kind of cool to some extent, where at least there's something there and something happening. So I definitely think that they've done it the best way. But I also like it's a true test, I think, to some extent of like what it actually takes to be an athlete. Because I think some people, like when you look at like the best athletes that we know, like say LeBron James, right? Like that guy can compete in front of a crowd. It doesn't matter whether it's a home crowd or an away crowd. Like that's what makes him who he is. But I bet you there's a lot of people in the NBA that aren't necessarily that superstar level. And one of the things that may prevent them from being that level is not necessarily physical abilities, but the mental abilities to have fans booing at you. So it'll be interesting to see like what happens with players, like how that environment actually has an effect. Like my assumption would be that some people would thrive on that, like people that would otherwise not thrive with a fan base yelling at them, booing them, might thrive. And then also some people that thrive with fans angry at them won't thrive as much because people feed off a different energy. So I think it'll be interesting to see how that affects sports, right? Like how not having necessarily like a crowd that either loves you or hates you be there.
Yeah, I think now like it's really a true testament to it's really going to show who wants to be great and who's really there just for the accolades, right? Whether it's just like getting like adoration from fans or playing in front of people or like traveling or that stuff, right? Like at the end of the day, like all the frills have really been taken out and this is just true basketball. In a lot of ways, I actually think the Raptors are favored. Keep in mind, like they've more or less kept their team together for the past 4 years.
Right.
They've actually had the best winning percentage out of all of NBA players for the past 4 years.
Wow.
I think they won like close to like almost 70% of their games, which is just insane, right?
So you think they have a legit shot at this point?
Yeah, I actually do. Like a lot of people aren't taking them seriously. A lot of people are actually giving them credit to not even make the playoffs or maybe finish as like a seventh or eighth seed prior to the start of the season, right? So I think that they're just so together, like they're so in tune. They've been together for so long. They've been through stuff together.
Yeah.
Whether it was like losing to LeBron a billion times or winning it last year, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and they have the best coach in the league by
Yeah.
far. Like
Yeah.
Nick Nurse, like his scheming ability with him and his coaching staff is head and shoulders above any other coach out there, right? And then also with their management, like with
You wouldn't
President
you wouldn't say that he just walked into sort of a good team already? Like, I mean, it was pretty incredible that he became head coach and then he wins, right? Like
yeah.
it was also sort of, I mean, he was already part of the team in other capacities, but I mean,
Hmm.
it's still, he had a great team at the beginning of the season too, with or without him.
Yeah, I mean, so he definitely did walk into a great situation, but by no means was that team a championship team
Right. Yeah.
prior to him being the head coach. Like the things that he implemented were things that the previous coach, Dwayne Casey, definitely would never have.
Like what?
So
Like you know more
uh,
than me, but what's an example?
yeah, just scheming around like defensive rotations, setting the tone when it comes to offense, being a lot less predictable. Like Dwayne Casey was very predictable to the point that LeBron would start calling out plays during the playoffs and telling players on the Raptors that you're supposed to be in a certain location. Like that's how bad it got. So this is like something that's like very well known
Yeah. Yeah. No, I remember that.
within
Yeah.
within like the Toronto Raptor, I guess like fandom. So
Yeah.
yeah, like there's a lot of props that's given to Coach Nurse and even President Messiah and their GM Bobby Webster. Like they've done a fantastic job.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
they definitely, it's been incredible to see a team,
Hmm.
that has been in the league for what, like 20 something years, to go from,
Yeah.
I remember when they first started, like you could, like they were handing out tickets for free. Nobody wanted to go to those games,
Yeah.
right? And then it just exploded, and the environment around it, like,
Hmm.
obviously growing up in Toronto as a kid, and you and I are around the same age, it's always about the Leafs, right? And then the Raptors
Hmm.
come into the picture, and I remember going to Leaf games as a kid and in my young adult life, and then like comparing that to basketball, just even the environment, like to go to a Raptors
Hmm.
game, I love it way more than a Leafs game. That's just my opinion.
Yeah.
I know some people might disagree, but just the everything about it is so much more fun, right? Like
Yeah. Hmm.
it's a fun experience where hockey, um,
You
the
said it.
hockey,
You said it right there. It's just an experience. Like
yeah,
it's not
yeah,
just basketball. Yeah.
yeah, and hockey's a tough thing in this city and in this country where, like, athletes, I think it goes back to what we were saying about playing in Canada. Like,
Hmm.
athletes here in Canada, it's tough, right? Because like a team like the Raptors, you have a whole country that wants you to win. Like that's a
Yeah.
lot of pressure. Like it's one thing when you're playing in a city somewhere and you've got a fan base or whatever, and that's fine.
Mhm.
Some of those cities are as big as our country in terms of population, but it's still at the end of the day not a country, right? Like,
Yeah.
and so when you have that kind of weight on top of you, and just when you think of the parade last year and like what happened in Toronto when they won, just it's absolutely insane. Like, and
Hmm.
that's the other thing that I feel like, going back to Kawhi, like he's almost a god. Like he
Yeah.
would have been a god here, like just like an absolute god.
Yeah, and like looking back, like that's also what's funny about it, right? Is he had everything lined up for him. Should he resign, even if it was just for a year? And he just said like, no, it's okay. Like, and I actually think that's super
It's
hilarious that
it's so
that
fits
all
his
of those,
personality.
yeah, yeah, like he's just such a low key guy, and like he's just like, no, like I don't want that, I want this, and he just left, and like you have to respect that. Like
Oh,
you
100%.
really, yeah,
The thing that I respect about him the most is that even if at the end of the day he wanted to be here for a year, a lot of people would have just taken that as like, I'll do whatever I want during that year. The fact that he actually played the way he played all the time goes
yeah,
to show you the professionalism, right? Like for him,
yeah.
and that's a nice thing too, to see people who can separate, like, for them it's also a business, right? Like that is also their
Hmm.
job. That is what they're being paid to do, and what they're being paid to do is to win, and to go out
Yeah,
there and win and do that, and not think about anything prior or after, but to live in that moment, to be the best you
yeah.
can in that very moment. I think that goes a lot to show the type of athlete that he is. And and why he's
Yeah.
achieved what he's achieved so far. I mean, for me, he really stands out as a guy because I feel like in a lot of ways that personality resonates with me. Like someone, like again, going back to social media, right? Like I've never been someone with social media, and because I don't want to put all my stuff out there. And like even a lot of what we do, and this about me, like a lot of the times, even a small thing, like if you say, give me a picture of you and your family, for me, that's like pushing the boundaries of what I'm ready to do. Right.
Yeah.
So, but I know that it's important to, sort of build a brand and get all that stuff out there. But it is a tough thing for some personalities, I think, to just give in to the way the world is right now. And it's I sort of respect the way he is, the way he just sort of, that's his philosophy in life. That's what he wants to do. And that's what he does.
Yeah. I mean, like, and he's obviously won a ton, right? Like, he's won championships. He's been on like all NBA teams. He's probably regarded as one of the top 3 players in the league.
Yeah.
And that stuff doesn't really matter to him, right? Like,
yeah.
like the great thing about that year is like he played his heart out every single day. Even in the playoffs, like it wasn't that he just played well. Like he put up historical numbers.
Yeah.
On par with Michael Jordan, who's probably the greatest of all time, right?
Yeah.
So that, and like he also played hurt through some of the series as well. So yeah, like there's no real hard feelings. And I mean, there shouldn't be with any Raptor fan, right? Like any real Raptor fan, they shouldn't be mad at Kawhi because you know what? Like
I don't think anybody is. I don't think any real Raptor. Like at the end of the day, we got something that nobody ever thought was possible. And again, just to have that in this country, right? It's been so long since we've had a championship in any major league, right? And to have something where a country, the nice thing about the Raptors too is like if it was hockey and like the Leafs won, then you're getting a certain portion of the population. But everybody in Canada, in fact, when you looked at the stats from last year, even other parts of the states wanted the Raptors to win just for it to be different, right? Like outside of the area, outside of the Golden State area, and like where
the California area,
where the fan base was, other people wanted the Raptors to win. So you had like the population of North America to some extent cheering for a team, also that underdog story, like everything about it. It was just it was incredible to see it happen. And then how much of what happened last year do you think, like if Golden State had the team that they like, if Durant hadn't been hurt and all of the things that they succumbed to, how does that series change? Probably, I would assume.
Yeah, absolutely. I like it would. It's probably a toss up. I mean, I know a lot of people don't give Durant the credit that he deserves because he did that move of going to Golden State. But he's also one of the best players of all time too, right? So if you were to add him to the series for a full 7 games, it would be a lot tougher. Like it completely changes the complexion of the series. So I just prefer not to look at that and not consider that because
people can always say that, but that's the reality of sport is people get hurt, and if someone's hurt and your best player is out, then that's the reality of the sport. Like I don't like when people use that excuse for anything. Oh, but at that point they were hurt or they were this or they were that. It was like, well, that's just called being part of human life. Like the unexpected can happen. So, if you're talking about this scenario where everything is perfect, then you're not talking about being human, right? Like that's an artificial intelligence in my mind, right? Like now it's a virtual reality, and that's not what this is. That's the reality. Emotions matter, injuries matter, like things happen. I mean, the classic example of that is Tiger Woods, the best golfer in the world for a decade. No one thought that he was unstoppable for anything. And then what changed really in his life was a lot of the psychology of it, not necessarily anything to do with his physicality. He did go through surgeries and things like that. But really what threw him off his game is everything that happened in his life. And that goes to show you that it's not the virtual reality, right? The aspect of being human is what makes it all so interesting, and that people can get hurt, people can have interactions that they didn't think they were going to have, and that stuff happens. It's just crazy. So, I mean, it is what it is. They're the 2019 champions. It doesn't matter how you write the story. It just is what it is. They won, and it's pretty legit. You said something a few minutes ago about arguably Michael Jordan being the best player ever. Is it still arguable? What's your, again, as a true basketball fan, like it's interesting to speak to you about this because you obviously have a lot more knowledge, but is there even an argument anymore?
With Jordan being the best, it's interesting because he's obviously been retired for quite a long time, and with the people just obviously just forget. especially with nowadays, there's so much content that goes on that you sometimes put people on a pedestal when they shouldn't be, right? So uh, um, watching the Last Dance documentary is definitely reminding me of how great Jordan was.
Yeah, that was such an amazing documentary.
Yeah, and when you watch it, like you obviously see the highlights, but you don't really think about his everyday approach mentally, and how cutthroat he was, and how much he wanted it. And I think that's what separates him from a lot of other players. Also just the fact that he won every time he went to the finals, right?
Yeah. That
Like
cutthroat mentality is interesting because I know a lot of people that watch that and they almost lost respect for him. And it's like, to me, that's such an odd thing because it's like you think you could possibly be the best at anything in the world if you're not an absolute savage. Like you have to be that mentality and think you're that. Like people were like, oh, he's so conceited. Like, well, yeah, no shit, he's conceited. Like like you have to be. If you don't believe that you are that good, then I just don't think it would be possible to be that. I don't think you could be humble and be that good. I think you have to genuinely believe that you're the greatest to be the greatest in anything. And I think it's pretty consistent when you look at all the greatest in any field. They sort of think that way.
Yeah, of course. Like he was so ruthless with his time and with his approach and with everybody on his team, and he was just so focused game to game. I live by a quote, like I'd rather be respected than liked, right? And I think that's something that Michael Jordan had too, right? Like he'd rather that people almost fear him,
almost
to the point that
almost like a mobster quote, like where you'd rather be feared than loved.
But yeah, like that was Michael Jordan's approach, where he'd rather people just fall in line and play the way that he wants them to play, to ensure that they win, as opposed to him being a guy that's liked by everybody.
What was most like what really showed me his drive in that documentary was when you're watching and like when he like would challenge himself on something, like if someone did something on another team to be better than him or show him up in any way, like it turned into a competition in his mind, right? Like where then he was competing against, like, and almost not even making it known. It was just like, fine, I'm gonna prove you wrong. Like this is now in my mind and I need to do this to really to prove it to himself more than anybody else. But he's just like, he's a savage, but he's a savage because he's the best.
Yeah, I mean, the beauty with him is that he always found a reason to give it his all, right? Like he always found motivation, even the littlest things. And whether if it was real or if it was fictitious, he always found a way, right? And now looking back, like you kind of think of it, it's just like, God, he was kind of a sociopath, like the way that he would just make up stuff in his head just to get motivated. But that's what he did to more or less get to that extra gear that he might have not gotten to.
There was, it's interesting that you say sociopath. There's a book that I read, and I can't remember the author, and I may butcher the title right now, but it's essentially something like the psychopath inside you or the psychopath in the mind. But essentially the reason why I bring it up is the basic concept of the book is that those qualities that make a psychopath are also probably the qualities that make someone who's absolutely brilliant. And really what matters a lot in it, and what the author argues, is the life experiences, like what happens in your life that can either take you to use what we perceive to be a bad thing, like whether you can use it in a bad way or you can use those tools in a good way. And I think there is a lot to be said about that, like that these people that are this brilliant at anything to some extent are wired a different way. They're wired in that extreme way that had something been different in their life, they might also be a serial killer type of thing, right? Like, but because everything was tuned in right, they just focus all that energy and that focus and that power into something good and beneficial, or at the very least something that doesn't hurt other people, right? Like something like basketball. And I think that's true. Like when you look at high achieving CEOs, whether it's if they run a company or if you look at athletes or rock stars or anything, they're made a different way.
No, I agree. Like I know a lot of the top CEOs, whether it's like a Mark Benioff at Salesforce, like they have qualities that are very that provide, I guess, like the insight of like a sociopath, right? And like I actually think, like even like in relation to like the Raptors, like a Masai, for instance, like he can get close to a player, but he can trade him the next day, and like that's like that's like kind of like a
Yeah,
trait of somebody that like is just not
yeah,
attached, like
yeah,
not emotionally attached to people.
lacking empathy, right? Like that's a key,
Yeah,
like a narcissistic tendency, like something
yeah,
where there's a personality disorder. Yeah, it's funny that you say that because that's true. You can get so close to somebody and love them, and then it's like, yeah, but I got to trade you tomorrow, and it sort of is what it is. And like
yeah.
that was the thing with DeRozan, right? Like
Hmm.
he loved him, and I'm sure he still loves him, and there's still respects him, but at the end of the day he has a job to do, and he's doing his job, and his job is
Yeah.
to what's going to make this team win. And I mean, people criticized him when he did that, but look what
Hmm.
he did.
Exactly,
Look what he
exactly.
did.
And yeah, and I feel like a lot of the players on the Raptors have the mentality too, where yeah, like they're probably really great guys off the court, but when they're on the court, like they want to put like they just want to destroy you, right? Like they actually want to put like their foot on your neck. Like I actually like 2 years ago, Fred actually said that in a post game interview where he said like, yeah, like we could be friends, but like once we step on the court, like I actually want to destroy you.
Well, what's funny that I think about Fred, like last year when he had his baby, and like a reporter, and again,
Yeah.
I'll butcher the exact quote, but the gist of it was like, "Dog, this isn't like," he almost like he was being so tough in the sense of saying like, no, this isn't like having this baby doesn't give me a new sense to win. And like people
Yeah.
sort of took it as like, oh my God, like how could you say that? But like at the end of the day, I think that's brilliant. It's like, no, it's like for him, it's like, no, this is about nothing more than the way I'm wired. Like this is
Yeah.
don't make this about something that it's not, which you know what? It's also refreshing to have people say things the way it is. Cause like we live in a culture now where like you almost have to say that, like, oh yeah, I did this because, of like this person or that person. Like, no, maybe you just did it because you did it because you're made that way. Like, and
Yeah.
it's just part of who you are. And like, it's funny. Sometimes I've said some of that stuff because I have a young son and stuff,
Yeah.
and like, and I do a lot of other things, and it's like, yeah, I think it definitely gives you a drive for sure. But I don't know. I just think back to when Fred said that, and I thought it was perfect because he just was trying to make the point that at the end of the day, to be an elite athlete like that, you've got to have that mentality where there's no other reason to achieve it except the reason that it is what it is. Like this is the point of what we do.
Yeah, yeah, and you know what? That's the beauty of the makeup of the team is a lot of these guys they were given up on, right? Like whether it was Kyle who when he was traded to the Raptors, like he was essentially given up on by his past team, which was Houston.
Right.
And the Raptors almost traded Kyle too at one point. So and then when you consider the team, about half the team was actually drafted in the second round or not drafted at all, right? So like even take a guy like Fred, where he wasn't even drafted.
Yeah.
He had to start from the very very beginning and grind his way through.
Yeah.
So like and a lot of like these guys have essentially had their teeth kicked in, right? Where like they've been told that they weren't good enough at one point in their career. So they've been through everything to the point that their mental capacity is so strong
Yeah.
that collectively they can just go through anything, right? And then last year, like obviously with Kawhi leaving, like and a lot of people writing them off, like they probably took that personal.
Yeah.
To quote Michael Jordan, right? Like they're just like fuck this, like
Yeah.
we like it wasn't just Kawhi, like we supported him and he was obviously our best player, but it wasn't just him.
Yeah. That's right. Yeah.
Yeah, so they probably took that extremely personal to the point that like they're an extremely well-oiled machine. Like the schemes that they come up with, how they play together. Like if I were any other team that were playing them, like I'd be very terrified.
So right now with this in the bubble, so what they've got, what, 8 games that are like regular season games, and then they move
Yep.
on to a playoff. And is the
Yep.
playoff being modified at all, or it's still 7
Still
games?
East West. Yep.
It's okay. So still that, and you think in what like essentially where we're at, that they've got a chance to what, at least make it to the finals in the East, and then maybe go on to the championship, or like what's your prediction?
Yeah, like I actually predict that they're going to go to the finals. And
Against?
Against either like one of the LA teams. Like
Yeah.
I would love, oh my God, it would be perfect if they beat the Clippers and they beat them in 7.
Oh yeah, then that proves that it's the team and not the individual, right? Like
yeah, and you know what, I think they're salivating at that idea too, right? But yeah, it's just because they are separated, so a lot of it just comes down to game day preparation, and being mentally focused day to day. And I think they're such a they're such a professional team that's been together for a long time that they can isolate themselves and be prepared, more so compared to other teams in that campus.
And who could stop them in the East if there's any team? Like if they who's the other team if they're not the ones going to the finals?
Yeah, I mean, the other team is definitely Milwaukee, with Giannis. They're obviously a great team, but they didn't beat the Raptors last year, right? So my theory is until you beat the team, you can't be considered better than them, right? Like they might change their personnel, it might have different players, but yeah, like you still got to give it up to the team that beat you before you can say that you're better than them.
Right.
Boston
And there's the
yeah,
psychological edge that they have to live with, knowing that they lost to that team. It was
exactly,
sort of like going
exactly.
back with the Cavaliers and the Raptors every time LeBron
Yeah,
beat them. Like you're already like almost in a sense mentally defeated before you even get
yeah.
there.
Yeah, that's the thing, right? Like humans are creatures of habit, and losing or winning, that's a habit, right?
Yeah.
So until they change that habit, I still think that plays into Milwaukee's psychological behavior, that they lost to Toronto last year, and pretty much any team coming out of the East, right? So
Right.
yeah, Milwaukee's obviously really good. They've had the best record for the past 2 seasons. Boston and Philly, like they have good teams as well. So it'll be interesting, but I would take Toronto just based on what I know about them, just following them closely, their personnel, the fact that they're so close. They also went to Florida a week earlier compared to the rest of the team, so they've had that extra week to kind of gel and get back into the swing of things. Yeah, and they've just matured so much compared to last year. Like when you look at the players specifically, like they carry themselves a lot differently than they did last year. They're not young guys anymore, even though like their team is still fairly young. Like
Yeah.
they're
Well, a
championship.
lot of them are champions, right? I think that
Yeah,
changes you can never take that away. That does something to you that I think just improves you, right? Like just the
yeah,
fact that you know you're a champion.
yeah. I think what we're starting to see is there's like a level of expectation, um, now that you represent the Raptors, right? Like if you come on the team, you have to play a certain way and you have to act a certain way, right? And I think that's really important, especially with the league becoming younger and younger. And shoot, like 19-year-olds playing the league now, it's important to have that professionalism game to game.
Right.
Yeah,
And I mean, we talked a lot about the Raptors, but bringing it back to Raptors Republic,
yeah,
if people want to sort of check that out, where do they go?
yeah. So across all the major platforms, Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, Twitter, YouTube. You can find us at Raptors Republic. And then our website is simply www.raptorsrepublic.com.
And that's mainly a fan-based led site for the Raptors, and it's just really about getting good information about the team.
Yeah, so it provides everything from, I want to say, game day analysis to post game analysis to player and team analysis. So whether you're looking for, I want to say, like high level stuff, or you're looking for like, I want to say, individual in-depth breakdowns, we got it all for you.
Nice. All
Yeah.
right, buddy. Well, I appreciate you taking the time to kickstart the
Yeah, of
basketball
course.
season again with us and give us some insight on everything. It's going to be really interesting to see. I hope you're right. I hope your prediction's right.
Yeah, me too. Me
You
too as
know a
well.
lot more than me. So, I mean, I think that would be amazing for them to win again without, like, to me, that's cool because it really solidifies them as a team, right? Like, I think there'll
Hmm.
always be that asterisk right now, like we were talking about, where it was like, yeah, but you had Kawhi and,
Yeah,
like Durant was out. And, like, there'll always be these little asterisks that you put next to 2019. And I think something like this, even if they go deep, right? Like, I
yeah.
think already the season that they've had already starts to eliminate some of those asterisks
Hmm.
and show, like, hey, this is a legitimate team. This isn't just, it's not like they're the worst team in the league all of a sudden, right? They are still there. They're contending every time that they play. And
Yeah.
like you said, they've got a decent shot at going somewhere. So, I hope you're right. And it'd be really interesting and amazing to see that all over again.
Yeah, I think the U.S. media, they always try to diminish accomplishments coming from
Oh,
Canada.
yeah. I remember
So
one year there
yeah,
was like, I forget what it was, but they were showing like the playoff brackets, and like before the
yeah.
series was even over, they had already eliminated the Raptors. Like it wasn't even like
Oh my God.
something. Yeah, it was so bad. It was
Yeah,
like it was so obvious, and people like made a big deal about it. But for them, it was just like, yeah, we already eliminated the team. They haven't been eliminated, but we're going to eliminate them here.
Yeah, no. So I think a lot of players they're cognizant of that, and they definitely take that personal, and it just serves to motivate them even further. But yeah, I truly believe that they have a great shot at winning it. Obviously, anything can happen in the bubble, but their chances of winning it are just as good as anybody else's.
Before I let you go, because here's another thing that I was thinking. So now so the 2021 season will start in like January now or something, right? Because it'll all be pushed.
December, yeah.
Yeah. So are they shortening the next season so that it still would finish at the regular time, or are they just going to go more into the summer as well? Like, do you know anything about that?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think they're scheduled to end at the same time. And I think they want to have the season starting in December and then just ending a bit later.
Right.
But it's definitely going to end around the same time. And yeah, they want to have that consistent.
You can't keep doing that, right? Like you can't start in December and then end it in September or whatever. And then, then you've essentially changed, which would still make sense since we always call it like, the 2020 season really starts in 2019, which is like it's sort of wrong, but yeah. So
no, for sure. Yeah, but I think they want to move to that format. They've been thinking about it for some time. But I don't think they're going to change it anymore. Obviously, everything's up in the air with COVID. But then we also need to keep in mind the Olympics. Like the Olympics will be starting again.
That's right.
It got pushed back to next year.
Yeah,
so
that's right.
I imagine that they want to end the finals just before the Olympics starts.
The Olympics, that way the athletes, yeah, I guess you're right.
And I don't even know what's going to happen with the Olympics. I think they might actually push it if they don't have an opportunity to flatten the curve with COVID, right?
Yeah, I guess at this point around the world, what really matters is what's going to happen. Is there really a second wave? And if there is, like, is it as bad, or are we prepared enough that we can, like, nip it right away and get through it? Yeah. So who knows? It's so much of it is BS to some extent, because you watch like the media outlets and like it's already like, oh, September, like for the average person, you talk to the average person and like September is already like, oh, that's when the second wave is going to start. Like I've talked to a bunch of people, and when they're like, oh yeah, September, that's the second wave. It's like, what are you talking about? Like, where did you, like, none of this is for sure if we just continue doing the right things, right? Like if we can all, and also, I mean, from a healthcare perspective, you and I have talked about this outside of the podcast, but like at some point too, you also have to make the decision on life has to go on, right? Like, and it might be scary, it might suck, but you can't keep everything shut down forever and for years. Like, I mean, the pain and suffering and the death that will result because of all of that will be so much greater than what the disease could possibly cause. But you and I will talk about that in our uncensored conversations.
Yeah, exactly. No, well, anyways, I do appreciate you having me on the Lou Down, being a interviewee. It was a pleasure being on this.
Well, you're our biggest fan because you have to watch every episode.
Yeah.
To get ready.
Yeah, but I can't wait for the rest of the season to go, and yeah, we'll stay tuned, and hopefully the Raptors make the finals and they end up winning it.
Yes, thanks, buddy. I appreciate you coming on, and for anybody out there, check out Raptors Republic.
All right, thanks, Luke.
Take care.